everybody. Can you hear us? Yeah, you can hear us. Thank the Lord. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bloomsbury's Global Night In. My name is Rhiannon.
And I am Hannah. And together we host the Two Girls, One Book podcast. We're coming to you today from very sunny North Yorkshire in the UK. And we were just saying before, we're so distracted already by seeing where everybody is. If you see Rhiannon just like veering off, it's because she's just keeping up with where everyone is coming from.
I'm just being nosy and reading all of your lovely comments. Hopefully lovely. Anyway, we're hosting this evening, as you well know, on behalf of Bloomsbury and also Tandem Collective. And the whole idea of this evening is to spread the word about Bloomsbury's English language editions, which are available to readers all around the world. And Tandem Collective, if you've not heard of them, are a most wonderful bookish community, and their idea is to work to promote all of the amazing new books that are constantly being released to us.
Now, if you've never heard of us before, we started our podcast during lockdown as a way to keep in touch with each other, also to connect with other readers and to keep ourselves a little bit accountable with our reading habits.
Yeah.
We're now in our 5th year, so you might think we're used to this, but we are usually hidden behind the safety of a microphone. So all of this is really scary. We're not used to being on camera, but we're very excited to be with you this evening.
Yeah, we're also not used to being live. So normally there's a bit of room for error. I can edit out all of the ers and general rubbish that we can come out with. So fingers crossed this isn't going to be a mess from us. The authors are going to be wonderful, we know that. But yeah, be kind to us because it's our first time doing one of these type of things.
So these 6 books are set to be huge on Bookstagram and Book Talk this year, and we've had some great fun reading this selection over the last few weeks, and we can't wait for you to hear from the authors this evening and maybe to add a few more books to your TBR piles. Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, we quite often get messages saying that we're bad influences with people's book buying habits, but we're okay with that, I think. Also, the good thing is that these 6 books that we're going to talk about this evening are being released fairly gradually over the next 6 months. So you don't have to go out and buy 6 books immediately. They're going to be drip fed to you over the next few months. So we should also say, actually, that there's going to be competition winners tonight. So each of the authors are going to be announcing a winner at the end of their interview, and that winner will win a random bundle of surprise books as yet to be determined. But you have to stick around to hear the end of every single interview to find out if you have been a winner. Well worth doing.
Okie doke. So without further ado, we will move on to our first course, which is Aftertaste by Daria Lavelle. This is a kind of quirky little take on a ghost story, a little bit of food writing in there as well. I was really excited when I saw that we'd be interviewing Daria, because I'd seen this on Bookstagram and was like right up my street. So can you tell us a little bit about Aftertaste? Where did you get the idea?
Yeah, first of all, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting to get to talk about this book with all of you. They'll give a really super high-level quick synopsis. So it's a story of a man named Constantine who discovers that he can bring spirits back from the afterlife for one last meal with their loved ones. And this sets him off on a journey to open a New York City restaurant serving closure. He never expects that journey to lead him to fall in love with someone with her own secret connection to the afterlife, or to wreak total havoc on the fabric of the afterlife itself in the process. So it's a ghost story, it's a love story, it is all food story. And the idea, somebody kind of, I was telling the story of how I got this idea, and someone pointed out to me that the way it happened to me is very similar to the way my main character, Constantine, can taste these flavors of spirits from beyond. It kind of just occurred one day. So I went back and I time-stamped the document. I went back searching for when I first wrote the first seeds of the story. And it was back in 2013. So I put myself in like, what was I doing? Where was I in the world? I was working in advertising in New York City. And at the time I would, leave work and then I'd go and sit in a cafe and I would write for hours until they kicked me out afterwards. And I remember kind of sitting and having this idea just come to me in this flood. I tend to be a writer that works in images. And so this image came to me, this whole fully formed scene of this guy in this Hell's Kitchen apartment, and he's plating this food, and he's clearly not a chef, not a professional, but he's trying really hard to get it right, and he's really meticulous, and he swipes the side of the plate with a towel, and then he pushes it forward, and this beautiful glittering ghost comes through this crumbling brick and tries to eat it. And so that was like the scene that haunted me, that wouldn't let me go. And I kept thinking about it, and I was trying to figure out, okay, well, who's this guy? Who's the ghost? What does the food do? How is he doing all of this? Can he do this with anyone? How does he know what to cook? And I found that I had none of those answers. And so I put the story kind of to the side for a while. So this was back in 2013. And then over many years, I kept getting these little breadcrumbs of ideas. Things would happen in my life where I'd go to a restaurant and I'd be like, oh, wait, this kind of makes sense. And all along, this bigger idea of like, well, of course a ghost would come back for food, because what more unfinished business could there be than an uneaten meal that's delicious, that's calling to you? So I was percolating all of this in my mind. And then at some point I went down a Wikipedia rabbit hole, as one does, and I started searching kind of things about psychics, things about psychic abilities. And I came across this tiny little article that was like half a page long, talking about how there are psychic clairs, that there's a psychic ability for every one of the five senses. So clairvoyance, everyone knows, is, you can see the dead, but there's also clairaudience, you can hear the dead. And then I read clairgustance, you can taste the dead. And I was like, that's it. That's what this guy has. That's how he made the food. That's how he knows. So that's how it all started.
Amazing. I really, really love this. I'm obsessed with food writing. Anything that's like literally makes my mouth water as I'm reading it, I'm like, yes, that's my bag. So I was super excited to read this one.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask. So the book talks a lot about death and the afterlife, but it's also an affirmation of life. So how did you go about balancing the sort of light and dark between the two?
Yeah, I knew when I set out to write this book that I didn't want to do scary ghosts, and I didn't want to do something that was about grief but extremely sad in a way that was not going to show the balance of life and joy. And so I tried very, very, very consciously to also make it funny and exciting, and have there be a love story, and have there be just like fun moments at a party and funny things that happen, and kind of that vibrancy and that magic that being in New York City and Manhattan carries with it. And I think that the idea of being in a restaurant and restaurant culture and cooking is also just it's so alive that it's hard not to kind of capture that side of it as well. But it was a very conscious choice to balance the light with the dark, and kind of have that experience like when you're eating a really good meal, everything's very balanced.
What made you choose the setting of the New York City restaurant scene? Like it read to me like someone who's got a lot of experience actually in the industry. Is it something that you've got experience in?
So I don't have experience in the restaurant industry, but I've always been kind of tangentially outside of it. Have always been a foodie, have always gone to restaurants, and I'm like the person obsessively peeking in to see if I can see in the kitchen. So that was me my whole life. And my family moved from Ukraine to the US when I was 2, and we settled in the New York area. So New York City and Manhattan was always my city. And when I was in my 20s and 30s, that's where I lived and worked. And I had so many just food, like deep core food memories, experiences with friends and loved ones at restaurants. And it was just so obvious to me that that's exactly where I had to set this. I think that there's a certain energy to stories that are in Manhattan. And I think especially the food culture is so vibrant and so interesting. It's this, like, when you think about it, it's a tiny little island, but you could eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks in between from completely different cuisines and different backgrounds. And you could do that for a year, probably many years, and never eat in all the restaurants that are there. So it felt like a really great place to set it. And there's also a lot of room, there's dives and tiny little holes in the walls and hidden gems. And then there's these fancy Michelin-starred kitchens. So it really gave me a lot of room to play with all of the different tropes and the different kinds of backgrounds that you can see in this world.
Nice. I love New York. So yeah, I adored that part of the story as well. I'm just sort of looking at the chat as we go along. A lot of people are saying what their taste would be, their aftertaste would be. So what would yours be?
So mine is extremely specific, like very, very specific. Right. So it is the chocolate cog from the 2012 menu of the restaurant Les Jules Verne, which is on the Eiffel Tower. But it has to be this chocolate cog, which is kind of like this mousse covered in this chocolate gloss. It has to be eaten in the pouring rain with the smell of petrichor and lightning. And that's because that was the meal that my then boyfriend, now husband, took me to before he proposed to me. So we had this amazing chocolate cog, and then we went out on the terrace and he proposed, and it just poured rain, and it was beautiful and romantic. And if there were anything that would bring me back, that's what it would be.
It's interesting. We talked about it a little bit this afternoon of what ours would be, and both of ours were food eaten outside. Mine is super specific as well. So mine is like a soggy cheese and onion pasty from the bottom of a sailing boat from when I was a kid. And it has to be like sweaty, been in the bottom of a carrier bag all day, eaten outside, salt in the air. And yeah, it's just the idea of like the memory that is attached to specific foods. It's such a great idea for just really getting that kind of emotional connection immediately.
Yes.
So you mentioned briefly about being an immigrant, and one creator reading the book in advance of our event tonight commented that Kostya's story is a perfect description of her own immigrant experience. So how did you draw on your own experience for this aspect, and in what ways did you kind of veer away from it?
Yeah, first of all, I love that it resonates on this level, because it was such a personal story to write, even though I don't bring back ghosts. I think putting so much of my kind of immigrant experience into Kostya was definitely part of what drew me to the story and to telling his story in this way. And I think, what was really formative for me growing up as a kid in a diaspora and not kind of being in my home country were things that really lived in my mouth. It was language and it was food. And I gave Kostya both of those experiences. So linguistically, he's not great at keeping that alive for himself. He is terrible at Russian. He never learned Ukrainian, and that kind of withers on the vine for him. But food is this thing that connects him to his dad and to his home country in a way that is really profound, even though, he's left it and he's very, very distant from it now. And I think that there's kind of this universal experience for a lot of people, but especially for immigrants, where food is home and it's connection and it's comfort, but it's also incredibly kind of disorienting and othering. And especially, growing up in the United States, I always wanted to be like everyone. I wanted to fit in and to be part of what was happening. And it was a dead giveaway at the cafeteria at the lunch table when everyone around me had peanut butter and jelly and I had something else that nobody could pronounce, that no one had seen before. I was like the stinky lunchbox kid. And so I wanted to give Kostya that experience of being othered by food also. But in his case, because I'm a speculative writer and this is a speculative story, his othering from food doesn't just come from eating something different. It comes from that too. But it especially comes from the fact that he's tasting these flavors from the spirit world. It's as other as you can possibly get. He's got, just like a lot of immigrant experiences, he's got one foot in two different worlds. In his case, that's the world of the living and the dead.
Nice. Final question. What do you hope readers are going to take from Aftertaste?
So I hope immediately when they put it down that they feel like, wow, that was a journey I'm so glad I took. I laughed, I cried, I felt, I swooned, I emoted. I want to feel the full gamut of emotions. But then I also, like, my deepest hope is that it lingers long after they've put it down, that it's the kind of book that, buries itself in them. So when they look at meals that they share with loved ones, with someone who's with them or no longer with them, that it hits differently, that they consider that food differently, that they take more time to think about the flavors of what they're eating and what they mean on a connective human level. That would be really special to me.
Amazing. And can we ask for our lucky winner?
Yes, I have to see if I can find it. Hold on. Uh-oh. Hold, please.
Drum roll. Let's up the tension.
Oh no.
That's fine. Just while you're looking for it, I just wanted to touch upon what you've just said there. It's such a kind of moment of pause in my life anyway, that kind of sit with family across the table and really connecting over food. So I think it's really nice to think of it like that, that if it asks people to stop and go, this could be a moment which has so much more meaning. Yeah, I think that's a lovely thing to take away from it.
All right, I found it. Sorry for the delay. Drum roll. The winner is Sandra S. Read books. Sandra reads books from Sweden.
Amazing. Well done, Sandra in Sweden. Thank you so much, Daria. We really enjoyed the book. So yeah,
Thank
we
you
can't wait
so
to see
much.
what's next.
Lovely stuff. On to our second author of the day. So we are now moving on to a little bit of historical fiction. And this book is out this month, and we are hopefully very momentarily going to be talking to Jo Harkin, who is the author of The Pretender.
There she is.
Yay, you're here. Fabulous.
I'm so glad I made it. Thank you guys for doing this. You're doing so well. I can't believe you're even nervous. This is incredible. And yeah, thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening to us. This is great.
Yes, we're very excited to talk about this. This is delving into an area of British history that, I'll be honest, I didn't know a great deal about. So it was a learning curve for me, but a very amusing and fun learning curve as well. So the first thing that I wanted to ask was, why did you decide that the story of Lambert Simnel needed to be told? Why him?
So it's a really interesting one in that it is a little known part of English history. I don't remember it from school. I think it sort of flies under the radar a bit because it was almost an interlude between the Wars of the Roses period and then the start of the Tudor era even. And so it was the late medieval era just ending and then the Renaissance just beginning. So it was a real period of change and it's kind of hard to define in itself. So I found that quite an interesting thing to explore. And then also you have a big handover between dynasties. So Richard III, the notorious Richard III, had just been kind of overthrown by Henry Tudor, the founder of one of our most famous modern dynasties. But the Tudor dynasty at that point, no one really thought it would last. Henry he was seen as a tenuous king with very little actual legitimate blood. And so throughout his reign, you got these kind of pretenders and challengers to the throne popping up, and Lambert Simnel was the first one of these. Having said that, I hadn't heard of him at all until I saw him literally in a footnote. I was just randomly reading a book about English kings and queens through history, and it just caught my eye, and it really stuck with me because it was just such a wild story. The fact that there's this kid who comes out of nowhere, mysterious origins. He's claimed to be the Earl of Warwick, who's the York heir to the throne. He's like the last legitimate prospect. The real Earl of Warwick was in the Tower, but that didn't stop the nobles who were putting Lambert Simnel forward, claiming that he was this kid. And then while he was still a boy, he basically headed an invasion of England that was backed by various other countries in Europe, and faced off against Henry on the battlefield. And then while he was still a child, he was defeated, and then he was pardoned and put to work in the kitchens of King Henry. And after that, we just don't hear any more about him. I mean, no one was really interested in, giving him a prominent role in the history books at that point because, they wanted to minimize the idea that maybe there was something to his story. It was brushed under the carpet. And that really intrigued me as much as the craziness of what we know of his existence, this blank space in his later life, which is, I think that's quite exciting as a writer, the idea that I could create this second act for him that was sort of up for grabs.
Yeah, it's what a gift for a writer to have like such an exciting, interesting character, but to be able to build upon that. It really grabbed me when I was reading it. I was like, yeah, how exciting this guy is, because not much is known about him, and you get to kind of build that from scratch. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this. One of the other characters, Joan, is a really strong-willed character. So what was it like crafting a female character, navigating power in a world that had not very much space for female power?
Yeah, this was actually quite a surprise to me as I was researching, because I had this conception of the medieval era as a time when women were kind of chattel, like they didn't have any agency, as you say. But it was quite refreshing and exciting to discover that at this point in history, women did have a bit more autonomy than I thought. This was kind of pre the witch trials and post serfdom. And as a common woman in particular, a peasant, you really had like, you could choose who you married if you stayed with them. You could run your own business, you could fight your own cases in court. And as a widow, you had pretty much as much power and freedom as a man. I think if you were a noble, your hands are a little bit more tied, because for noble men as well as women, you'd be expected to make a strategic alliance through marriage, and you didn't really get to pick who that was. But then, if you were lucky, they would die, and then you could do what you wanted. So with Joan, this is kind of the situation that she's navigating, because she's the daughter of the Earl of Kildare. He's also known as the Great Earl, or the uncrowned King of Ireland, Gerald Fitzgerald. And he's just this very powerful, very charismatic figure. He's well known, he's the history books have a lot about him. And actually he had these several daughters who made it into the history books on their own behalf. They were also seem like formidable women. The fact that their personalities are even written about is quite significant. Joan, we don't actually know that much about her personality, and I probably did her a little bit of disservice. I kind of took her out of the strong female character type and kind of pushed her into sort of psychopath territory. She's entertaining, but she is incredibly manipulative. You wouldn't want to get in her way, and she's well versed in political machinations, and she actually kind of decides to take it on herself to give our hero Edward, as he's that's the name he's going by at this point in the novel. She gives him a bit of a political education, and in the meantime he thinks he can change her and sort of get her back on a more godly path. And at the same time he's sort of falling for her as well, even though he's horrified at himself for doing so.
Nice. One thing I was gonna ask about was the choice of language in the book, because although it's written in a very sort of accessible and modern way, there is kind of harking back to slightly more archaic spellings, etc. I said to Hannah before that at the very beginning I started reading it and thought, there's loads of typos in my arc, because there's certain words that are just like spelt differently. I quickly realized that wasn't the case. But how did you go about sort of choosing exactly how to express and what language to use?
Yeah, it was a tricky one. I didn't want to go the route of trying to replicate how they would have spoken them, because at this point it would have been Middle English, and that would just be a really hard read. And I didn't want to sort of come up with a very sort of formal historical style. I think that is, tradition in historical fiction. But for them, they would have spoken in a way that sounded fresh and slangy and casual. And the only way I can really replicate that for a modern reader is to use our slangy, casual language. So I tried to keep out obvious anachronisms, but also I kept it sort of fairly simple, fairly modern, but added in some of the really rich language that they had at that point. Like they have some, partly just because I love the words, like they had some brilliant language, which I think is why we've got this quiz. I don't actually know quite how the quiz is working, so
we'll find out in a minute.
We'll muddle through it together. So I just wanted to kind of give a flavor of the era and a sense of immersion without going full Chaucer, which I think would be a big ask.
Well, it really worked. It did kind of put you in that time period, but without really kind of alienating. So it really made me kind of feel part of it. With that being said, now we might jump into a little Tudor language quiz. I think Jo's got some questions that for us and everybody watching to try to guess the meaning of some Tudor words or expressions.
Yeah, this is audience participation.
Now, I was talking a big game before we started, and like, I'm going to be great at this, so I might be ready for a big fall here.
I love this idea. So I actually just saw one of the words pop up in the comments. Someone just said they liked it. So the first word is cupshotten. I don't know who wants to guess at the meaning of that one.
I would guess it means drunk.
Is that, do you both guess? Do I just say when someone?
No, Hannah's going to answer for both of
This
us.
is my segment.
You were right to be confident. Cupshotten does mean, yeah, given to drinking, a bit of a drunkard. So
Okay.
That's good. And then the next word will have 2 words, sore wrath, and that's wrath, R-O-T-H. Sorry, W-R-O-T-h.
Sore as in S.
S-O-R-E.
Oh, angry. You like angry, mad at somebody.
You're doing so well. It's so sore means basically very. It's an intensifier, and wrath is, yeah, anger. So you could also be wonderly wrath. That would be if you were very, very angry.
Oh, I'm wonderly wrath. I'm using that one.
Brilliant. So word number 3 is hudda-mudda.
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah, I feel like it feels familiar to me. Is that kind of like a jumble of like a crowd, a jumble of people?
I'm sorry, you've that's your first mistake. It's so hudda-mudda basically means low-key, secretly. So if I were to whisper something to you, I'd be telling you it hudda-mudda. It's yeah.
Ooh, I like this game. Yeah. We can keep going. One more. Let's do one.
Okay,
I've got
one
to get
more.
back my crown.
So this one, I'm actually not totally sure how, and I don't think I'm going to be able to find the pronunciation online. So it's either, I'm pretty sure it's orgulous, O-R-G-U-L-O-U-S.
I mean, thinking of the spelling, that could be filthy. I would say, is it someone who's ugly, someone who's not attractive?
I like that. I think that is, yeah, there's a kind of, that makes sense to me as well, but it's actually not. It means someone who's quite haughty and arrogant. So it's proud, but in a superior kind of way. So you could be an orgulous knight.
Okay. But
Nice.
two out of 4 ain't bad.
You did very well. I mean, I was completely rubbish. So there we go.
So one of the questions, which I think is a really interesting one, based on the people that we've got here, the countries that everyone is coming from, our audience likes to read in English, but obviously there's people from across the world. How does it feel knowing that you're bringing a lesser known part of English history at that to readers all over the world, not just to the UK?
I mean, pretty surreal. I still can't quite believe that that's what's happening. Yes, it's an amazing thing. I think in this scenario, it's actually really, I hope it lands, and I kind of feel like hopefully it will, because this isn't like a part of English history that we all know about, and you know that someone from coming with no prior knowledge would be a bit lost. Like, no one in England knows this story. So I feel like you don't need to do further reading. Hopefully it functions as a standalone story and you can pick it up and enjoy it. I hope I've put in enough background that you can just follow it as the story of this boy turning into a man, as its own tale. And it would be amazing if that then spurred people on to kind of have an interest in the period, or read more along the same lines, or just shed a bit more light on, quite a little known passage of English history. But yes, can be enjoyed on its own terms is what I would hope for.
Definitely. It's as I said, an area that I really didn't know anything about, but I found it fascinating and also very funny. I just wanted to say that as well. He was a very funny protagonist who I really enjoyed reading about, and also some just terrible language, which I also enjoyed the filthy language. So just FYI.
I wasn't sure. I didn't know whether to put in the rude words in the quiz. I was tempted to. I could do a whole quiz just of the filthy words. But, I didn't know what the tone was.
Brilliant. I guess we should probably wrap up by doing our little giveaway winner, if you have that to hand, hopefully.
I clocked it and made a note of it earlier. So the winner is Aurora from Italy. I don't actually know how you pronounce her handle. It sounds like Babel Buccia. I don't know, but yes, well done, Aurora.
Well done, congratulations.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Jo.
Thank you so much.
So totally different genre now.
Wild.
We are moving on to book number 3, which is a debut novel. It is Julie Chan is Dead, and the author is Liann Zhang. This one we were both very excited for. It's influencer culture. Hi, Liann. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for this book? What was your inspiration?
Yeah, for sure. Basically, it was inspired a lot by my own personal experience. When I was 16, I had awful cystic acne. And being a teenager, growing up online, what was the most obvious option? Obviously, to make an Instagram account to review skincare and document my skincare journey. So I started to post reviews of skincare products up online, and for some reason, people just followed me, even though I was a teenager with no, knowledge about what makes good skincare whatsoever. And I kind of got to see the behind the scenes of everything and meet new people and kind of just absorb what it might be like to be an influencer on a small scale compared to the people in my book. But also just being, a chronically online individual. I've seen every influencer drama you can imagine, and I knew there was something there. So finding a way to combine my perspective with all the zany stories kind of became this book.
Amazing. We really want to know the tea behind this. Did you base any of your characters on real life influencers?
Ooh, for legal reasons, no. Yeah, obviously I can't be like, I think for people who are also invested online like I am, they might spot a few Easter eggs, I would say, that reference specific moments of time in internet history. But in general, like a lot of influencers, you get to meet this group of people called like the Belladonnas. They're mostly shaped after like influencer archetypes. You got your fitness influencer, your beauty guru, and the one that's just like really hot and everybody loves. Like there's kind of that. So it's more an amalgamation of different characters rather than specific people. But yeah, there's definitely, I think, some people that I'll not name, but our influence there.
Yeah. What a superpower to have, to be able to like get your own back.
Yeah.
So obviously we've said there's so much about influencer culture in this book. So in what way did you draw from your own experience as an influencer in order to write it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I had a unique perspective going in. Not only was I able to kind of, in the middle of the book, when Julie, the main character, is fully trying to be an influencer, I kind of got to go through the everyday minutiae of what that might be like. But aside from that, I did incorporate how I personally felt within some circles as a skincare influencer. It's such an interesting industry, like the beauty stuff, because it takes a certain amount of privilege to like break in, because you can't post about products when you only have like one Neutrogena face wash. You kind of have to own things, have time, have a certain amount of money to spend on things to even post. So being in that, there's a certain amount of privilege that comes through. And I was a teenager. My mom was very kind to let me use some of her money to buy things. But, the vast majority of people were grown adults. And there is a certain amount of, a certain group of people that tend to pop up in those types of spaces. So for me, it was so interesting because I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia. So I don't know if there's Canadians here, but kind of known as like Little Hong Kong or New China because there's so many Asians. I never felt like othered in my day-to-day life until I came into this world of like influencers. And I got to experience like a new sense of like privilege and entitlement from certain people that made my identity feel very like acute, and I was very aware of myself. And it was just interesting seeing the dynamic of how, people portray themselves a certain way on their feeds. And then I'd click onto my DMs and get into these group chats and they'd act very different. And it was just so fascinating to kind of explore that threshold between like how they present themselves and how they might act behind the scenes. Yeah.
Nice. This book has some wild twists in it as well. It's not what we thought we were setting out to read at the very start, put it that way, which I think we both absolutely adored.
Yeah.
So how did you decide how far to take these characters? Was it something that kind of evolved naturally, or did you set out with the idea that you were going to write some absolutely insane stuff?
I think my brain works in twisted ways, unfortunately, and I did have the ending in mind going into it, and I don't think it's a spoiler because it says in the blurb they do go to an island. So it was very much I wanted a locked room, but a locked island type of pressure cooker situation, and it's based upon, I'm sure everyone's seen the brand trips that influencers get sent on, these glamorous $1 million trips that are so lovely. And, sometimes I see those specifically during COVID. I remember there's a pretty infamous one that beauty gurus got sent to. And I was scrolling on my feed and I saw people dying from COVID and news stories of horrific things. And then the next thing I see is like, come with me to this brand trip to like feature this lipstick. And it was just so dystopian and so unsettling to me that it made me wonder, like, we only see these small clips of these people, but they're there for like days. And of course, my brain just naturally goes to the worst possible direction. And I start to wonder, like, what are these people doing off screen? They're probably just having fun, tanning, eating lots of food. But, I don't know if I'm mentally unwell or something, but yeah, I obviously just had to take it in the worst direction. And nowadays I think we are very aware of there's like documentaries coming out about like influencer cults and stuff, so this is nothing new to me, but the book it was written before these documentaries, so I've heard rumblings, and let's just say some things are close to the truth. Some things are more in my brain though, but yeah.
Well, I'm very pleased that your brain went to those weird dark places. In this book, Julie, who is our protagonist, she discovers the dangerous underbelly, as you were just kind of alluding to, of the world of influencing. So what aspects of the influencer scene did you want to highlight the dangers of?
This book has a little bit of satire in it. I personally didn't possibly think I could write a book about influencers without acknowledging kind of the underbelly of everything that goes on. In a lot of ways, like, it's a dramatized version of the influencer world. There's a lot of truth in how someone like Julie or myself, it can be so easy to kind of get inducted into the social media machine because you're rewarded with all this like power and attention and love. It's like so addictive, and it's this thing that or I don't want to make assumptions about everybody, but I would say like I crave that feeling of connection. It can be fallible, but it feels very, very real. And once we kind of have the opportunity to get that, I think a lot of people might resonate with like the idea that we might start shedding some of our values and who we are in order to like continue getting that type of feeling. And that's kind of a character arc Julie goes through. And in that way, it's a reflection of real life where these are regular people, like influencers are regular people, but once they get thrown into this world, there's a lot that, they might sacrifice in order to stay on this platform to get this relevance. And in that way, it's like, I want people to question, who are these people really? Like, what are they going through behind the scenes? Like, what is ticking behind their brains that make them act a certain way? Because even though influencers often seem like our friends, they present like a very honest, close kind of relationship, and it's very parasocial in a way. At the end of the day, we really have absolutely no idea what they're doing, and we're only seeing what they want us to see. So, just come out of it taking a more critical look at social media, and just remembering that, nothing is as it seems.
Nice. I was just reading in the comments that Jasmine has said, if you went back in time, would you still choose to become an influencer?
I think I would, because, well, I was only there for like my teenage years. Like, I stopped in university, so it was very much like a small bubble. I never got, like, again, super big. Like, I never got millions and millions like the ones in my book. But it was just like such a novel experience. Like, I was working part-time at a bakery then, and I'd work for a whole month. I get my paycheck, and it was like less than what I get for posting like a dumb photo. Like, as a teenager, that is such a novelty and like such a privilege. And the idea of like getting new things, like free things all the time, at one point was like the best feeling ever. And then eventually you start to kind of have to face the fact that, oh my gosh, I'm like a machine in this overconsumption capitalistic hellhole, to be honest. Like, it doesn't feel good after a certain point. I'm sure some people will still continue to love it, but me personally, I didn't. But I was very grateful because I met so many people. I had like lots of like industry connections who like still reached out to me for like photography and stuff like that with brands afterwards, even after I stopped posting review stuff. And also then I could write this book, because I don't think I would have written it without that experience, Yeah.
I'm very happy that we get to just be sent books which don't feel like we're part of a big, I know it doesn't feel like we're part of a horrible capitalist. We're just getting sent lovely books to read. So who are your writing role models? Which authors would you recommend to those who loved your book?
I think like a very obvious one that's been comped a lot, like Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I absolutely admire her and how she's able to like switch genres, and everybody still wants to read like whatever she feeds us. Like, I would eat up her chewed gum, to be honest. Like, I would do it. Another one is Mona Awad, because she's a little bit weird. She does some odd things, and I like it when things get weird. Also Ling Ling Huang, who wrote Natural Beauty. I admire her writing skills. One day I hope to be like that, but she also, is able to talk about really, really serious issues, but in such like a beautiful way. So I feel like people would enjoy that too.
I can second the Mona Awad. So when I read this, it really, really reminded me of Bunny, particularly that kind of toxic group of girls and the weird twist that it took. So yeah, I definitely got Mona Awad vibes from this. Yeah, loved it.
Yeah. Final question to wrap up. How does it feel seeing your book being read all over the world?
I'm like at once overwhelmed and so grateful. Like, I can't believe my silly little weird influencer story would be read by so many people and taken seriously. Part of me was also worried that like the humor wouldn't come through, because like different cultures have such different humor. But I guess in a way, like, influencers have transcended all of that, and it's, we've all seen it. We're all a part of that culture, so it's really entertaining to see people like getting what I'm trying to do, and it's such a novelty, and I love it.
Yes, we both loved it.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, I think I read it in one day, straight through. I couldn't put it down. Once you get to that kind of feverish middle section, I was like, well, I've got to know what happens now. Have you got a winner of a book bundle to announce for us?
Yes, I do have it here. Their username is at Bookish Ranja from Germany. Congratulations.
Yay.
Oh, in the comments, there we go. Congratulations. Well, thank you so much for talking to us. Fabulous. Right, we are on to our next one. And this one is going to be the author of best-selling Wolf Den trilogy. She's back, and this time she is exploring Boudicca's Britain. So hopefully we are going to be joined by Elodie Harper. Yay, there she is. Fabulous.
Nice to see you.
The technology is working for us at the moment, because we're not in charge of it. Hello, anyway, nice to see you.
Lovely to see you too. Really enjoyed it so far. It's been great hearing about everybody's books.
I've been enjoying it as well, actually. So,
yeah, we're excited to chat to you. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what Boudicca's Daughter is about?
Yeah, so I don't know how many people have heard about Boudicca. She's fairly well known in Britain. She's this rebel queen that was around in the 1st century after the Romans had, like, a couple of decades after the Romans had invaded Britain. They were in charge of quite a lot of southern Britain, and she led this massive rebellion against them. She sacked 3 cities, including London, and she's this sort of huge figurehead of resistance. She was also incredibly violent, but it's that, for me, the thing that's interesting about her is that she's a woman with power. You know, she was a military and political leader, but a lot less known about her is the fact that she had 2 daughters. So the rebellion kicked off, it was the Iceni tribe in the east of England, after Boudicca's husband died, and he left the kingdom jointly to their 2 daughters and to the Emperor Nero. Rome took huge umbrage at this, and it was like a horrific atrocity. Boudicca was flogged and the 2 daughters were raped, and that was what provoked the rebellion, that and Rome's sort of general oppression. And I just found it really depressing, actually, that this is all that's recorded about the 2 daughters, this sort of horrifying act. They don't have names, they kind of disappear. We don't really know what happened to them during the rebellion. We don't know, you know, if they survived. And I really wanted to write about their story because I was just curious, what would it be like to be a child of Boudicca, you know, like this massive figure. And there's a statue, I don't know if anybody's seen it, if they've been to London, on Westminster Bridge, of Boudicca riding her chariot. It looks like at the Houses of Parliament to like attack the MPs and burn it down. And behind her are her 2 daughters. And they've had a wardrobe malfunction, obviously, so they're topless, which kind of irritated me as well, because it's like, oh, not only are they victims of sexual violence, let's sexualize them. So a bit like writing about the women of Pompey's brothel, where I wanted the women to laugh back, to hit back, to be the center of their own story. That's what I wanted to do with Boudicca's daughters. So like, I didn't want the rape to be on the page. Obviously it's a huge event, but it's not described on the page. It's you know what's going to happen, and you come to the aftermath. But also I just wanted them to be real people. So Selina, the eldest daughter, is the woman of the title, and her younger sister Belenia is also a big character. But that's kind of how it started. And I wanted to think both about what it would have been like to have been part of that rebellion, but also to have survived it. What would it be like in the aftermath? Because that's pretty much never covered or written about. We get the kind of glorious rebellion and the tragedy of the battle, the final battle, but we kind of leave it there. And so I really wanted to know what Boudicca's legacy was, both sort of personally and in politically as well, really, for her daughter. What would it mean to be Boudicca's daughter in a world where Rome had won? How would she continue to resist? Would she continue to resist? So that's kind of where it was. And also the Boudiccan revolt as a family drama. You know, you've got these huge personalities, the dad, who was a client king to Rome. You've got Boudicca, who was really anti-Rome. You've got the 2 kids. I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and I always thought like the Denethor, Faramir, Boromir relationship was like really interesting. The idea of like one child being favored, one not. So all of that I wanted to kind of place in there. And I'm not like a huge battle person, although I do love like the Rohirrim and Helm's Deep and everything else in Lord of the Rings. But yeah, so it's although it's not battle heavy, really. I focused on the sack of the cities and on how the war impacted people personally, rather than, you know, kind of lots of armor and sandals.
Yeah, I said this when I read it, when I started, I was a little bit worried that it was going to be a bit too blood and guts heavy for me. But you need that as like context, and then it quickly moves on to the real meat of the story.
Yeah, and I really didn't want like loads of battles and trudging around in mud. Like the defeat of the 9th Legion takes place off the page. I didn't want to like have a pitched, like loads of pitched battles and all of that. And you know, most of the book actually is not during the rebellion. It is the aftermath. It moves to Italy. So we've then got the Emperor Nero as a main character, and kind of the court in Rome, and you know how Roman women interact compared to Iceni women. So yeah, it's not a kind of blood and sandals book.
This is kind of a side note, but I did, because I read The Wolf Den, and I was, as I'm reading it, I'm thinking, oh, how amazing to like go into Italy and to research this book. And then when I started Boudicca's Daughter, I was like, oh, well, that's a bit grey, miserable Britain. This must be a real change. And then I was very pleased that you very swiftly, we go back to Italy and we get to have a little bit of sunshine.
Yeah, you sound like General Paulinus, who's like, where's the sun? He's desperate to get back.
So how long did it take you to write and research the book from the idea and to the point that we have it now as a finished book proof?
So the thing with sort of Roman set books, because I have read quite a lot of Roman authors and done a lot of research about the period, so a lot of it took place before researching this specific book. And then, but then I did, as you say, it does start in Britain. So I had to do quite a lot of new research on Roman Britain and on the Iceni tribe. I'm not sure I could give a time, also because I write to contract. I'm kind of like, you know, I had about sort of 18 months to read, to research and write it. But I would say I knew I wanted to write this book quite a long time before that. So while I was writing the Wolf Den trilogy, I was researching. But for this, it was like really curious to research the Iceni, because unlike the Romans, they didn't leave written records. So I'm quite a visual researcher anyway. So like with Pompeii, rather than, I don't really get a sense necessarily, however brilliantly a history book is written of a place. I do like to see stuff. So with Pompeii, you walk down the streets, you see the colorful frescoes, you walk into houses, you're like sat at the bar and see the marble countertop the Romans would have seen. And with the Iceni, you know, looking at some of their massive kind of golden talks or their artifacts or their beautiful kind of carved fire dogs or the cauldrons, you know, their art is incredibly sophisticated. It's so different from ancient Rome. And there's also some of their myths and legends of the ancient Britain survive, like the Mabinogion, the Welsh group of stories. So it was really kind of like piecing together, I guess, although it's not fantasy in terms of there's no supernatural element, it felt more like the fantasy genre writing that aspect, because we just don't know what all the belief systems were. And it was also quite interesting that women had so much more power in that society, and yet we also don't know really how that works. And I think a bit like Jo was talking about earlier with The Pretender, that she was surprised by how much more power women had in that time period. I think with the Iceni, it's almost like we see them through the prism of the Victorians and later really sexist periods of history, and actually don't appreciate how powerful the women of ancient Britain were. Like Boudicca was not the only queen. There was Cartimandua in the north, the queen of the Brigantes, who was this huge figure who like binned off one husband and took the next as it was like her husband's like spear holder, or she fancied him more, you know, like it was a different world. So I loved kind of thinking about how that might have worked as well.
Nice. Did you get to do like travel for this research?
Yeah, so I kind of coincided with some work I did for my Italian publisher in Rome because so much of it's set in Nero's Rome. I went and saw, you know, quite a lot of the sites in Rome, but also his Golden House, which is a less known kind of tourist attraction, which is like, it was beneath, it sort of submerged. It is Nero's kind of really opulent palace, and the building of that is in the book, but it was also just to get a sense of just how wildly extravagant it was. It had this revolving ceiling. You don't see the revolving ceiling, but you see this massive kind of ceiling where like petals and scent would drop down on the guests from below. You know, it was kind of luxury beyond what we can really imagine. So yeah, going to Rome to see some of the remains of that was really interesting.
I'm gonna have to go now.
It is great.
Not petals falling on your head, then it's gonna be. So what is your favorite aspect of researching a book that's set in a time period so vastly different to ours?
So I think it's twofold, really. There's the visual that I mentioned. So I do think like seeing the material objects from the past is one of the most unfiltered ways to connect with the past, because you are just responding to those objects. You know, you might have like a handy little piece of paper that's explaining what they are or what they were used for. But in many ways, sometimes we don't know, like particularly with the Iceni and kind of ancient Celtic people, you know, you've just got these extraordinary objects. We don't know the stories that some of them are telling. So I think the visual's really important. And like I say, with Pompeii, like the physical space of that brothel, the frescoes that were on the wall, just seeing it, experiencing that space, how tiny and cramped it was. And then reading works written by people from that period. So for me, the most interesting thing, and the thing that I try to stick to as much as I can, is like the mindset of the people who existed in that time. So although I'm a feminist, none of the characters would be feminist. Even if they were powerful women, there wasn't feminism at that time. So it's trying to really put yourself in their shoes. And I always have specific Roman texts that kind of impact the book that I'm writing. So for Boudicca's daughter, there was a poet called Lucan, who's actually a character in the book. His wife's really the main character. Lucan's kind of a bit of a sideshow, really, but he wrote this poem called the Pharsalia, or Civil War. And I found that really interesting because we think of the Romans as being this really belligerent bunch, and they were, but in the Pharsalia, Lucan really reflects on the horror of war. And one of the things he says is that victory does not bring joy. It brings misery to the defeated and guilt to the victor. And certainly in the character of Paulinus, the general who defeated Boudicca, like the idea that guilt comes to the victor was something I really wanted to explore with him, so that he wasn't a kind of cardboard monster, that he was a real person too, and impacted by these events, and how he was impacted by what he did and what he saw.
So you mentioned Paulinus there. Selina, Boudicca's daughter, has quite a complicated relationship with Paulinus, and it goes through a pretty wild story arc from when they first meet to where we leave them at the end of the book. What are you trying to convey to your readers through their story?
So I really wanted, with the relationship between Paulinus and Selina, to do unexpected things. I didn't want it to go off in tropey directions or expected directions. I suspect it will be a Marmite relationship, maybe for some readers. I hope people like it. I mean, Paulinus is both an individual, and he also represents Rome to Selina, and the same is true for what she represents and who she is to him. So their relationship works on two different levels. They're understanding each other as individual people, but also relating to one another, that you can't remove the context of how they know each other, or how the Iceni feel about the Romans, or how the Romans feel about the Iceni. So that was part of it. And I wanted to think about the way women in the ancient world, I guess a bit like, because I don't want to be too spoilery about the relationship either, because it takes quite a few twists and turns. But I think the women in the wolf den, you know, who've been so objectified and kind of laughed at and despised and kind of belittled, I wanted them to be courageous and dignified and funny and warm and human. And similarly, I think that, you know, the losers in conflict, it's great to have Boudicca and her glorious rebellion, but, you know, like, what happens if you fail? What happens if you then have to cohabit or collaborate with the people, or the person who's invaded your country, who's defeated your people? You know, that, you know, at one point, Selina says that, do you think, you know, it's less courageous to survive? And I guess that's what I wanted to convey with how she copes with Paulinus, and how she copes with life after Boudicca, really, is when you've lost everything apart from your wits and your heart and your sense of yourself, you know, how do you survive in the world then?
Amazing. I just read a comment a while ago saying that they want to petition for Elodie to write about all the badass women in history. Do you have a list of women that you're going to educate us about?
I do have quite a lot of women I want to write about, but I think similarly with the Wolf Den trilogy, where these are kind of nameless women, it's not just sort of the big famous characters. Like, I didn't choose to write about Boudicca, but about her daughter, who we know a lot less about. And although I am really drawn to uncovering some of these kind of more famous women, I also want to continue to write about ordinary women as well. because I think their stories are really important. So enslaved women, or like women of the brothel, like in the Wolf Den. But, you know, there are many, many different women. I really loved writing about women from the Roman period who had a more, I mean, egalitarians may be a bit anachronistic, but, you know, they had more power, they had more agency. So I think that's something I want to explore as well, more. So women who are kind of at the time of the Roman Empire or Roman Republic, but not necessarily always Roman women.
Looking at the comments, everyone is in favour of you writing and teaching us all about history. So get writing.
I think that is probably around about time. So have you got a winner of a book bundle?
I'm just trying to find it because I've been trying to keep half an eye on it. Oh dear, I feel like I should say something. Well, I don't want to be the only author who can't find it.
Don't worry, it's adding to the tension.
It's adding to the tension.
Someone has just said a lovely comment. If you published your shopping list, they would read it.
That's very nice. Thank you. Oh no, I feel terrible that I can't see this. I don't.
Well, not to worry.
I have had half an eye on it the whole time. It's 18 new messages. Maybe it's been sent again. No. It doesn't seem to. Oh, hang on. Yes.
Amazing.
And now disappeared again. It's Julia from South Africa, and it is at Bookworm99, which is a great handle. So congratulations, Julia.
Congratulations.
Great Roman name as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Fabulous.
Okay, so our next book is another debut author, and this is Brittney Arena with her book A Dance of Lies, which is possibly one of the prettiest proof copies that we've ever received. Rhiannon, my glamorous assistant, is going to wave it at the camera. What a pretty proof copy this was. We were very excited for it. Hi, Brittney.
Hi, I am so excited to be here and equally nervous. I was telling everybody earlier, I'm a writer, not a public speaker, but nonetheless, you all have been so wonderful, and I'm so excited about all these other books. I have been riveted listening, so this is so fun for me too.
Okay, well, hopefully we will not scare you too much.
No, we're nice, we promise. So I guess, but first things first, if you could tell everyone a little bit about the book to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. So A Dance of Lies is about a girl who was once the king's prized dancer until he framed her for murder and threw her in prison, only to pull her out 2 years ago, offer her freedom if she agrees to spy for him at a royal gathering.
Amazing. So Vasily, what is the inspiration behind Vasily's character, and what obstacles does she have to overcome in the novel?
Yeah, so I really wanted to write a character who was a bit older and who had already lived and lost like I have. So for Vasily, she essentially had her dream career and she thought she made it. She was like working in the king's court. And the same was true for me in a sense that I felt like my life was on track. I had what I thought was my dream career at the time until I got really sick and my whole life fell apart. And so I actually based Vasily's 2 years in prison off of the 2 years that I was essentially bedbound for 90% of the time. And her medical conditions mirror my own. And I especially focus on POTS in the book, but more so like during that time where I barely moved for months on end, it damaged like my nerves, my muscles, and everything so much. And I actually based my her journey of recovery off of my own, off of the timeline that I did, like very intensive physical rehab and therapy. I am still disabled and chronically ill, like Vasily, and my conditions are such that I face a lot of chronic pain on the daily. And the reality of people like me is that we often have to find new ways to do all the things that we want to do to live and work and survive. And so the same is true for her. In the book, she can't dance the way she used to, so she has to rely on her wits and her creativity, especially in the form of like a prop that kind of she develops that helps kind of distract from that, so that she's still able to do what she is literally being forced to do to survive. And most importantly, I will say, like, writing her was my way of proving that life is still very much worth living, even with high amounts of pain, and like our lives can still be so wonderful and romantic, and even among all of the challenges. So yeah, that's kind of where she came from.
She was such a good character to read because the layers of her personality, like you really see her strength in kind of how she faces what she's dealing with now as we meet her. The court that Vasily is asked to infiltrate is very, very glittering, beautifully described. Both of us said that we really loved the kind of scene setting in this book. We really could place ourselves there, but it's also dangerous. So was there any real life monarchies that inspired your setting?
Yes and no. So a lot of it came from my head, but I really focused on kind of just at its core, like I wanted to focus on giving those who usually have, like, giving a voice to those who otherwise don't have one. And so that even goes beyond Vasily and her character. Like, I wanted to just honor other cultures and show the detriments of how prominent ones in history have talked over and squashed many other beautiful ones that deserve to have a much bigger voice. And so that was kind of like a bigger blanket statement that I wanted to make. And I didn't end up focusing on any like modern day nations or anything, but more so like empires of old. So I drew a lot of inspiration from that. And I will say, like, for example, Sarai is loosely reminiscent of the Songhai Empire. I pulled a bit from ancient India and how women were seen as divine. And so Queen Sadira is like a big like testament to that. I wanted her just to be this like beautiful, strong character that Vasily really looks up to. And Miragen specifically was loosely inspired by the French Baroque era with like a little bit of like an Art Nouveau flair and so on. So yeah, there's like a lot. I have a huge world building doc, but really just the heart of it was just about voice.
We loved it. I think the cover really portrays like the imagery as well, really, really well. So trying to avoid spoilers, let's talk about Vasily's mission in the court. So it was pretty stressful reading about her making friends with people she's supposed to spy on. Was it stressful to write about?
Oh my gosh, yes. I would not make any of the decisions that she made at all. And but I really wanted to get in her head in terms of like how far are you really willing to go to earn your freedom? But every time I had to write like a betrayal scene or her hurting somebody, like it hurt my soul. It is just so not who I am. But it was also really, it was kind of fun in a sense that I really got to explore like the depths in such a way I would never want to do it in real life.
She was such a fun character, but she definitely kept me on my toes. And I think that's kind of what Rhiannon was alluding to. Like, it was quite stressful at times, like not knowing, because obviously we meet her and her goal is to be free. She wants her freedom. And to her, in the first place, there's only one way she can see out of that. But as we see her through the novel, you kind of realize that there might be other alternatives to her kind of to buy her freedom. How did you come up with the names for your characters and the setting? I know you've kind of said a bit about your inspiration, but were you inspired by other languages?
So most of the names were actually right out of my head. Vasily, to my knowledge, is not a name that exists. I mean, it might, it's like I'm not claiming to have invented it throughout history, but like, yeah, that was out of my head. A lot of them were. Some of the names do have meaning behind them, such as Marania, which means death. I do have a funny story about Anton, which I know not everybody knows who that is yet, but he's a prominent character in the book. His name was actually a placeholder. Like, it's a perfectly lovely name, and but I think I was like, for a long time I was putting pressure on myself to like come up with this really suave, charming, like kind of sexy name because he's one of the love interests, and I never came up with anything and it kind of stuck, and now I feel like it just kind of works with his kind of quirky, ridiculous personality. So yeah, fun fact, it was not meant to be his name, and now it is.
He was an accidental Anton.
He was.
Hannah said, was it when we were recording that you were wondering if authors for all of these mad words and names have like a boggle box and just like shake up the letters, or like Scrabble and
just put your hand in a bag of Scrabble tiles and there's a name.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, a lot of them just came to me like as I was writing them, and kind of like going back to your other question, the same with like Vasily's choices. A lot of the times I didn't know what she was going to choose until I was writing it. And yeah, and I didn't like, just names kind of, it ended up coming down to like what felt right. And then I would go back and like look at the meaning and so on. So yeah, a lot of this book was just very like, yeah, just kind of like as it came to me, it ended up in the book. And yeah.
Do you know where she's going next?
I do. I have written the sequel, and I'm currently in edits with my editors. They had some wonderful suggestions on how to like kind of take it to the next level. But I will say I don't think it's going the way many people will expect, hopefully, and we get to explore a lot more of the world than you might think. So yeah, it's been really fun. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I think both of us finished it like, okay, and what now? I like what? Which is a compliment.
Yeah, definitely. Are you a fantasy reader yourself? And if so, what's your favorite fantasy read of this year?
Oh yes, I am. I love fantasy. It's why I write it. I feel like it kind of saved my life in a way, because, you know, during those 2 years that I talked about when I was so sick, I had literally nothing else to look forward to. Like I would go from bed to doctor's offices to the IV chair, but then back to bed. And I wasn't a reader before then, really. And I picked up books out of just literal desperation to have some kind of joy in my life. And fantasy really filled that gap, because I found that I really struggled to read or watch anything in the real world because my world was taken from me. And so I needed something completely new and fresh. And so, yeah, fantasy did that. And I have been so lucky to read a lot of good books this year. I will say one of my very favorites is House of the Beast by Michelle Wong. I devoured it. It is so good. Like, it is so dark and twisty and like just wild, and it was the best time. So, and it's not for the weak of stomach, but it is so good.
Okay, that sounds like so I'm not normally a fantasy reader, but I want something that's a little bit dark and wild. So maybe that might be something.
It is.
How does it feel knowing that your book is going to be read in English across the world?
Oh, you know, I think I am still living in a state of denial. Like, I don't it still breaks my brain that this is happening, because like the Brit from years ago when I was writing this story, because I wrote this book in 2018, I did not ever think it would make it on shelves. I didn't think my words would ever be important enough to be read. And so this is still wild. And I think my brain has still not wrapped around it fully. Like this, I don't know. It's very strange and surreal, and a dream come true, and a dream that I think I'm still going to wake up from.
Well, this is going to be out in June for everybody else to read, and we are already really looking forward to that sequel.
Thanks so much. You did great. Okay, so from one fantasy debut author to a fantasy heavy hitter, our final author, Rhiannon, is going to introduce, hopefully, because apparently there's some internet issues, but hopefully we have Samantha Shannon, who probably doesn't really need much of an introduction, let's be honest. But Samantha, yes, you're there. Hooray. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. I'm really sorry if I'm like breaking up at any point. Like, it was totally smooth for the whole event. And I was saying I had to get a hotel for the night because I've been having Wi-Fi problems at home. And now my Zoom is showing that I'm also having Wi-Fi problems in the hotel. So I think I'm cursed. But hopefully you can hear me, if nothing else.
We can hear and see you. So we should be good. Fab. So I will admit that I was a Samantha Shannon virgin until reading this prequel. So I just want you to kind of go over the order that these books should be read ideally, if that's okay?
Sure. I wish I had a straight answer for you. So I wrote The Priory of the Orange Tree as a standalone, like way back in like 2016 or something. But then I decided that I really wanted to write a prequel called A Day of Fallen Night. And then I decided that actually this world was so big, it had a lot more stories to tell. So I wanted to keep adding to it. But the basic premise of the reading order is that you should be able to pick them up in roughly any order you want. So they all technically are self-contained stories. It just depends which one appeals to you. So you can either read it in publication order, which is Priory of the Orange Tree, A Day of Fallen Night, and then Among the Burning Flowers, or you can read in chronological order, in which case it would be A Day of Fallen Night, Among the Burning Flowers, Priory of the Orange Tree. But yeah, I think basically it doesn't matter. Whichever one looks like it's going to appeal to you, then it should hopefully work by itself. But I designed this book specifically, Among the Burning Flowers, as an accessible entry point to the series for Roots of Chaos readers, because, or actually people who want to read Roots of Chaos but haven't started it yet, because I felt like a lot of people are very intimidated by the size of the main installments. So I felt like I needed to write a couple of shorter stories just as a gentler introduction to the world.
Yeah, I appreciate it massively, because now I am 100% going to be reading the rest. But this was great to like to dip my toe in just to figure out if it was going to be for me, and it's going to be for me. So.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, just to give you, I'm halfway through Priory of the Orange Tree now, after starting it from this, because this one was just a kind of nice little gateway. We said earlier, it's kind of a gateway drug into the world. So you've described the roots of the Priory universe as being inspired by a rich tapestry of global myths and cultures. Were there any specific legends or historical moments that influenced it in particular?
Yeah, so the main inspiration was the legend of St. George and the Dragon. So I was raised in the Church of England, and St. George was a very important figure in my childhood because of that. You know, he's a Christian military saint. He's also supposed to be this embodiment of England and English values and ideals. And I always loved dragons ever since I was a kid. I watched the movie Dragonheart for my 5th birthday, and it was just a love affair with dragons ever since. So the legend of St. George has always fascinated me, and I was particularly interested in who is the princess that St. George rescues from the dragon. So I decided to do some research into different versions of this legend, and it turns out it's actually a very disturbing story in multiple forms of it. So there's a particular version called The Famous History of the Seven Champions of Christendom by Richard Johnson, which was written kind of around the same time as Shakespeare was writing. And this version of St. George is so frightening. Like he's not heroic at all. He's actually very villainous. You know, he just massacres innocent people because of their religion. He is threatening women if they won't be in a relationship with him. But the author kept persistently writing him as if he was heroic, despite these very frightening actions that he's taking. And I was so angry with this, you know, 400-year-old story and this man who wrote it, who's been dead for a very long time, that I decided I needed to write a series that kind of, or a book at the time that, I don't know, I suppose kind of just rallied against this version of St. George that I found so disturbing. So I wanted to write a story where lots of people from different backgrounds come together to defeat the dragon, and it was going to be very, you know, a very female-oriented story and have lots of female protagonists, and to be in a more matriarchal world than you often see in traditional fantasy. It is very much supposed to be a traditional fantasy quest narrative, but just with a focus on women and with a diverse cast of characters. So yeah, that was the main story that inspired it, was the legend of St. George. And actually the orange tree from the title, The Priory of the Orange Tree, also originates in the legend of St. George. So there is a version of the story where St. George fights the dragon underneath an enchanted orange tree, and the fruit restores him during the battle. So I took a few elements from the story and wove it into this world. In terms of historical influence, even though it is a secondary high fantasy world, there is a lot of historical influence in it, particularly from the 16th and 17th centuries. I found that period very interesting. And that's also the period that we draw on in Among the Burning Flowers, which is set about 3 years before the start of the Priory of the Orange Tree. So it feels quite Elizabethan. There's a character in Among the Burning Flowers who is loosely inspired by Philip II of Spain. And then Sabran from the Priory of the Orange Tree, who is mentioned in Among the Burning Flowers, is again loosely inspired by Elizabeth I. So I just think that a lot of fantasy is very, Middle Ages, very medieval. But I just love the Elizabethan era and the Tudors, and I really enjoyed weaving that into this story.
You mentioned just then that it's still got this kind of quest narrative, and I really felt reading it, it gave me feelings of like old school Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, the idea of them going on a quest. So I think that's kind of really what piqued my interest, because sometimes with these huge big fantasy worlds, it's so overwhelming and daunting to kind of get your teeth into. This one is a little bit shorter. So how did you find writing a novella compared to your usual full length? I've got Priory of the Orange Tree behind me, and it is an absolute wedge of a book.
Yeah.
Did you find it challenging, or was it quite freeing to have that kind of short size?
It was quite freeing. It's always a bit of a shock after working on Priory of the Orange Tree, because I was like, oh, I've edited it in a normal amount of time. I haven't taken months to do every structural edit. I do have another series called The Bone Season, where the installments are slightly shorter. So the shortest book in the Bone Season series is 115,000 words, which is actually pretty slim. But I haven't written a book quite as short as Among the Burning Flowers before, apart from the novellas I've written for the Bone Season. But technically Among the Burning Flowers has now edged out of novella size. I think it's about 60,000 words, whereas novella is technically 40,000. It was definitely an interesting challenge, because I wanted to tell the stories of these 3 characters. So there's Estina Malago, who you meet in the Priory of the Orange Tree as a privateer / pirate. There's Albrecht Libellin, who is the I can't really talk about his story in Priory without spoilers, but he's basically a character who is in a romantic relationship with one of the Priory characters, but you don't really hear from him. And then the main character of Among the Burning Flowers is Marosa Vitalda, who is the Princess of Iskelin. And she was kind of, I was really taken with how many people who read Priory loved her. And it was really, she was the character that this story started with. So I knew that I was going to give Marosa this character arc in the book, but then I had to try to make 3 characters have an arc in a relatively small space. And I'm used to having much more space to kind of stretch out. So yeah, it was an interesting challenge, definitely a lot easier in terms of we're just in 2 countries rather than multiple countries. It's a much tighter focus. So yeah, it was easier in terms of world building and editing and so on, but it was also challenging to fit a satisfying story into a smaller page count.
One of our commenters here said, will you be writing another book involving these characters following on from the events of Priory?
Well, I would like to write a sequel to the Priory of the Orange Tree at some point. It would ideally wrap up the Roots of Chaos cycle. So at first I want to go back and do more prequels, because I think that there are just so many fascinating stories in the ancient part of this world. But then I would like to wrap it up with a sequel to Priory that ties all of the loose ends. So you would see some of the Among the Burning Flowers characters in that sequel, not all of them, because certain members of the cast may not be alive anymore. RIP.
That's the danger with fantasy, isn't it? You can't get attached to a character because you have no idea what's going to happen to them on the next page.
Yeah, I can be pretty brutal sometimes.
So you mentioned the editing process there. You have recently released a 10-year anniversary edition of your Bone Season series, and you not only edited, but you rewrote parts of it. What did you take from that experience, and are we going to get a 10-year edition of Priory?
No, I don't think so. I think people wouldn't trust me anymore if they thought that I was going to edit all of my books 10 years later. There's certainly things I would change about Priory with hindsight. Not many things, just like very small details. Like I'd like to make the final battle longer because my editor thought it should be shorter and I disagreed, and it was, you know, a back and forth. And yeah, certainly small details I would change, but nothing major. Whereas the Bone season, the main reason I wanted to rewrite the earlier books in the series was because I wrote the Bone season when I was 19 and I got my first book deal when I was still at university, and I'm still working on that series now, you know, over 10 years later. And I think that I have a lot more writing experience under my belt now. And there were so many things about the Bone season that when I looked back on it, I was like, oh, you know, I really wish I'd done this. And I wish I'd made that character arc a bit leaner. I wish I put in that funny joke that I thought of 2 years afterwards. And I was very surprised I was allowed to do it, because I don't think any author has ever done such an extensive edit on an already published book before. But I think I was very passionate about it, and I think Bloomsbury could see how excited and passionate I was because I really believe in the Bone season. Like, I think I love the series so much, and after Priory became my better known book, I really wanted to introduce more people to my debut series. But I found myself saying things like, oh, you know, you kind of have to push through the first book because I was a bit young and I dropped the ball on a few things. And I didn't want to say that, you know, I wanted to stand behind my art. So I was able to rewrite the whole thing, and it was such a cathartic experience. I mean, a few of my friends were joking and were like, it probably would have been easier if you'd just gone to therapy. And I was like, no, you're probably right, but this felt more cathartic for me. I'm genuinely a different person since I've been able to do it. I'm so much happier and so much more excited to talk about the series with everyone. So yeah, if you haven't read the Bone season, it's really different from the Priory of the Orange Tree, but I think it's a bit more of an accessible read. I would say it's like a first person perspective, and it's got quite a heavy focus on enemies to lovers romance, which spans multiple books, and it's very slow burn. So yeah, it's different, but I hope people will take a chance on it. But if you do, please read the new version, which has the beautiful floral covers, because they're entirely different books.
Okay, noted. I'll make sure that I do that. Last question. So you're obviously a prolific fantasy author. If you could write any other genre, what would you pick?
Oh, probably historical. So I'm actually writing a book inspired by the Greek goddess Iris soon, and I think that's going to be interesting because it will be like a bridge between fantasy in terms of the mythological aspects, but also history. So that'll be my first dipping my toe into semi-historical fiction, but I'd love to write something like what Elodie writes with The Wolf Den, in terms of shedding light on historical women's stories. And I think it's such an amazing thing that's happened over the last few years, where so many authors like Elodie, like Jennifer Saint, like so many others have written about goddesses and women who were sidelined by history, and they're actually bringing them out of the margins of those stories, you know, stopping them from being the footnote and making them the main character. So if I can write a few books that kind of add to that movement, that would be amazing.
Sounds good. People are losing their minds in the comments here, watching it like whiz by. Going, ah!
Yeah, I hope I can do that at some point. But apart from that, I think I'll mostly be sticking to fantasy because that's where my heart is.
Okay, so to wrap it up, we made a mistake already. We forgot to ask Brittney for her winner of the book bundle.
Yeah.
Oh no.
She has put it into the group chat, but I will say it now. It was Luna from Spain. Her handle is Dia Rio Deunastro. So there we go. We've done our job. We fixed it. Have you got your winner for your book bundle?
Yeah, I actually asked if somebody could email it to me because I saw the other authors not being able to find theirs, and I was like, I don't want to do this. Please double email me. So my winner is Vuvu from South Africa, and their handle is vuvu_venna. So congratulations.
Amazing.
Yay, fabulous. Lovely speaking to you, and yeah, we'll be doing our Samantha Shannon research now.
Oh, thanks. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for having me. This has been really fun.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. This is the bit where we wrap it up now. And normally I wave at Rhiannon when we're recording for no reason because nobody's watching. But I guess we can wave at you now and
We can, yeah.
goodbye.
Thank you so much for joining us. I guess if you want to hear more from us, you can go and listen to our podcast. If you don't, then don't. Otherwise, we'll talk at you later.
Thanks for being part of this, guys.
We've loved it.